Okay, thank you so much. And first of all, hi everyone, and thanks, Linda, for this kind introduction. I hope we really hope this will be a productive session, not too boring. So, and that we are able to somehow tell you a story that makes sense, and that at the end we are all aligned and we are all on the same page, and we all understand at least the need to have these digital CPV concepts, and how can we get there, and what will our organizations gain with it. So that's the goal for this session. And to get to this goal of this whole presentation, so we'll briefly and really briefly talk about this regulatory framework, then check some high-level benefits and also challenges. So we really need to acknowledge the challenges if we want to tackle them, to overcome them, and then talk about a case study. So we have made it generic. So we have transformed the real case study of an implementation into an approach, a proposal of how these implementations should be carried. And then we will finish with just a couple of closing remarks. And okay, before starting with the actual presentation, let's just do this quick exercise just for us to start thinking. We are not evaluating anything. We are just discussing or throwing some ideas. And the question here is related with the pain points that are usually associated with the implementation of this digital CPV approach, or even just a CPV approach without being digital. And we could even extend this to any digital solution. And the question is, for those of you that already have implemented a digital CPV, what were your main obstacles? And for the ones that did not implement it yet, we can also ask a couple of questions. Do you think any of these obstacles are preventing you to implement it? And if not, do you think they would be an obstacle? And let's think about these topics, such as the CPV procedure practice itself. So the ones that you already have in your organizations in a manual way, do you consider it ready to be digitized? And if so, your data, is it managed in a way that it can be easily accessible, shared, used? And the technology, do you have clearly defined requirements for such an approach or such a system? And finally, how easily do you think the organization as a whole, and well, particularly the end users, would accept changing their routines to now do this in a digital way? And this is just for us to start paving the way for the rest of the presentation. And okay, so results, they are really aligned with what would be our expectations. So not so much under the technology side, neither the technology selection or adoption, but these previous steps. And these are really great results for us to pave the way for this presentation. Why? Because we will see that the main obstacles are really related with data. How do we generate them? How do we manage? How do we guarantee its quality, its integrity? And even for the procedures themselves, they can be not yet prepared for being transformed into a digital way. So there's really a lot of, I would say, previous homework for us to do before actually installing and just deploying a digital solution. So those are really great results, and let's move on with this presentation. Okay, good discussion. It was as I said, a really door opener for the rest of the presentation. Now let's start with this really small portion, really small set of slides dedicated to the regulatory framework, just to set this baseline. Okay, so CPV, the CPV concept, continued process verification. This concept was launched more than a decade ago with this document, the FDA's process validation guidance, where CPV is this stage 3. So is this third stage of the whole process validation life cycle. It is a continued assessment of the parameters, the attributes within the control strategy that were defined in stage 1, so called the process design, and then refined in stage 2. The actual definition by this guidance says that the CPV is this continual assurance that the process remains in a state of control, so the validated state, during the commercial manufacturing. But okay, these are concepts. Let's not go into these details. Let's just acknowledge that there are some prerequisites, as I was just saying, that should really be taken into consideration when our organization starts this plan of implementing a CPV program, a CPV approach. And yes, it's mainly related with data. And of course, this data should include relevant trends and quality information regarding raw materials or components, IPC, finished products. It should be statistically trended and reviewed by trained personnel. So this is really important, to have trained personnel that are able to not just gather and collect, but interpret the data. And of course, with this ultimate goal of having data that's able to verify that the quality attributes are being correctly controlled throughout the process. Just a couple of prerequisites. Other than the FDA guidance, so CPV is also tied with other regulations, and we are just bringing this ICH Q8 here. And why? Because implementing CPV promotes the quality by design approach, and this quality by design approach is a concept brought by the ICH Q8. So this guideline refers to CPV as an enhanced validation approach, which fits within the quality by design framework, again brought by this guidance. It will also enable the adoption of these systematic QRM, so quality risk management practices. The definition of the design space. It will help ensure that the process is within the state of control. It will also be a trigger for the acquisition of knowledge for this process of decision making based on knowledge and science, and also to help the management of the product life cycle. This was really just to set a baseline. We all know the concept of CPV, either digital or manual or even just theoretical. We know its goal. So let's move on and look at what we consider the main benefits, but also the most important challenges that we really need to acknowledge and try to overcome. Okay, let's start with the gains, with the benefits. And I would say that the bottom line is that it ensures regulatory compliance. Yes, it will avoid findings, warning letters, but we should really look at this as something more than just a regulatory checkmark, just because it's a regulatory requirement that we have to implement. And this is really the goal for this presentation. What means elevating this practice, so CPV, to the next level? Let's first go through some theoretical, I would say logical gains before going into a more practical approach at the end of the presentation. And of course, by implementing a CPV plan, what will the organization be able to guarantee now? So this continuous collection and analysis of critical data, not just once per year or in any other defined frequency, but continuously, whenever needed, in a live way. Also, the identification of the sources of variability. So with a well set up CPV plan, we will know our process variables, their expected behavior, and at any process deviation, we will now easily pinpoint the root cause for this variation, and we'll be able to increase the control of our process over time. Also, our control strategies will be much more complete and scientifically sounded. And why? We are gathering knowledge. This knowledge will be supporting the decision and our strategies. Our processes themselves will be much more robust due to this decision-making process based on evidence, and will increase the overall process knowledge base. So the knowledge around our process and our products. And it will also enable this streamlined risk analysis process and mitigation plans. And we will see this later. This is part of the ultimate goal of this approach, or this next level approach. And of course, this will finally result in enabling a more proactive approach, able to anticipate and prevent issues such as supply chain issues. It also creates conditions for the continuous improvement and for this overall enhanced quality assurance. And of course, this will also increase the level of trust from the regulatory authorities. Okay, now let's focus on the challenges, and we really have to be clear here. So we are talking about real challenges from a real implementation in a real client, but I'm sure that these are transversal challenges and obstacles to the whole industry. So they are something that we need to acknowledge and be ready to overcome. Main challenge with the CPV plan, and in this case, we are talking about this customer had a manual CPV plan. It was a client with a big portfolio. They had around 100 products. And of course, with such a large portfolio, the main challenge was related with the resources and their availability in terms of working hours. And why? Why was this a challenge? So imagine collecting data and not just collecting, treating data for 100 products in different systems. So going to a LIMS system, an ERP, so SAP, a Kappa system, aggregating them in a single file, an Excel file, and then putting them, for example, in another system in Minitab, and then generating and updating graphics and statistics, calculating or recalculating statistics and metrics. And then at the end, we need to retrieve this from Minitab and collect it and paste it into a Word, for example, to build the reports. So we can all imagine the amount and the effort that was translated into working hours that this customer was investing to maintain a CPV plan for the management of 100 products. So this is really a big challenge. And just another, really just the last slide regarding this introduction section. Let's think about challenges, but now depending on the stage of the product, on the product stage. So comparing new products to legacy products, and on the new products case, what's the situation? So we have no historical data available yet. So our knowledge base around our process, around our products, is not yet consolidated. It's not robust enough, and this will lead us to the needs of developing this product in following a QBD approach framework, based, for example, on similar products that we have on our portfolio. But by doing so and incorporating these QBD principles in the product development, will in fact be we will be building and increasing our knowledge base throughout the product life cycle. And the implementation of a CPV plan will be just a logical sequence, a logical step, much facilitated by the QBD approach. On the other hand, a legacy product, so some product that it's already in its manufacturing stage, its commercial manufacturing stage, we will have a different type of challenge. So it is not the absence of data, but it's a large volume of data, some non-relevant data, noise. It is scattered across multiple formats and platforms. Why? Because it's for a product that was not developed using a QBD approach. So we might not even know exactly what is really critical or not. So what should we really be measuring or not? And this is the main challenge, to evaluate all this data that we are already generating and select the most relevant one. The data, not just the data, but the sources of the data. And this is the challenge before implementing a CPV plan for these legacy products. Okay, so we have looked at the CPV baseline, the concept, the challenges, the gains, and now let's start diving into a more practical part of the presentation, And so, as I've been saying, this was taken from a real implementation. We have turned this into an approach, a proposal, a suggestion of how a digital CPV should be considered. And just again, to reinforce, and before starting the actual approach and proposal, let's just refocus again on the challenges that this customer was facing. So what were their complaints, let's say? So they had a big potential of data integrity issues. Why? As a consequence of this high risk of data compilation failures due to human error. Why? Because all of these were manual tasks. They were totally dependent on manual activities, not just the data compilation, but also the graphics and generating the reports. The fact that data was only being presented at later stages was not enabling this proactive approach. So the organization was just being reactive to what the data was telling them at a late stage. And since the resources were concentrated and focused on aggregating, organizing, compiling data, there was no available time or resources to actually analyze it and retrieve the full value out of this data. So they were basically just doing that regulatory checkmark because it's a requirement, and yes, we are having a CPV plan. And so based on these challenges, these non-efficient practices, what would be the basic high-level requirements for a digital CPV? And I would say that any digital solution should be designed to address 3 different areas. So yes, meet the relevant regulatory guidelines, of course. They should be able to operate under what we might call now this Pharma 4.0, so under these advanced industry state-of-the-art statistical approaches, but also bring an increased efficiency to what is really typically a very cumbersome process. But okay, how is this translated into, let's say, meaningful requirements? So a digital CPV approach solution system should definitely ensure the following requirements. So ensure data integrity, as we have seen, the usage of what we call simple workflows, but robust and scalable enough to accommodate a large number of products. So something that is used but can be easily replicated. It should be able to evaluate the process at any time with dashboards, live tables, metrics, graphs. This integration of multiple systems, so that the work of pulling data from LIMS, SAP, equipment, monitoring systems, all of these is automated and aggregated into a single platform. And finally, the production of reports should be agile, automatic, on demand. So these are the high-level requirements, but now we will see with a bit more detail at each requirement. So starting with data integrity, how can we ensure this? So from this data integrity standpoint, these solutions should be designed to be integrated, of course, with multiple platforms. And how can we guarantee that the transferring data, for example, from one system to another, how can we guarantee this data integrity? So in the case of this customer, since they had a high number of products, as I've mentioned, and the high number of batches being produced, so the data acquisition was and is still done with a really high frequency. And so this will only be possible if we guarantee a set of these embedded rules or validations. So for data validation and duplicate removals, with data backup, of course, and data control access, all these routines that are clearly established. And yes, of course, audit trail should obviously be available for any data transfer activities. So these are the basic requirements for any software being used under a GMP environment. Of course, it will guarantee the integrity of the data. But data integrity should, on our vision and our approach, it should also be ensured within the deployment process as well. So not just by the system and the system functionalities, but with the method of deployment and installation, let's say. And so this is part of our approach, a guided step-by-step implementation, starting with this data mapping. Why? So where are the sources of data, and for which source of data? What is the relevant data we want to retrieve from this source? So meaning, what data do we want to include in our CPV plan and be able to continuously monitor? So be really have a rationale and a logic behind this decision will really help then the following steps. Then the definition of the integration plan, where depending on the sources and the data that we have previously identified, we will define the different requirements that we will need to implement these connections or integrations between the whole set of systems and softwares that we want to integrate. And only then the actual implementation of the connections. And of course, this has to be a task that has to be overseen by the IT team. And only then, yes, we shall follow the standard approach for the installation of any digital system within a GMP environment. So yes, let's install a validation environment, let's qualify it or validate it on the customer side, of course, and then have the go live. So you can clearly see that probably the majority of time will be spent on these initial steps. But by doing so, we are guaranteeing that our data is being correctly considered, identified, managed, and its quality and integrity will be guaranteed with these previous steps before the actual installation and deployment of the system. So then the next requirement related with this workflow for the CPV, what does this mean, this simple workflow? So any solution, not just our proposal, any solution should have this standard step-by-step CPV workflow, which makes it scalable, especially for these manufacturing contexts with a portfolio and large number of products, like the one in this case study. And let's look now at each step. So our proposal, the workflow must start with this selection of the critical variables. So what is critical? What do we want to include in our CPV plan? And these variables are, of course, our CPP, our critical process parameters, CPPs, our critical quality attributes, CQAs. They can also be the KPIs, performance indicators. So this selection of the variables that we want to monitor. And this is done via criticality assessment. And of course, this exercise should be done using risk management practices, ideally also integrated with the CPV platform. And why? So that we are able to bring the results of the process risk assessment exercise automatically into the CPV plan. But this would be the first step, even before start thinking about the deployment and how will my plan look like. No, let's first characterize our process, our product. Let's evaluate what's critical, and I'll use this information for the next steps. Then, of course, you have to select the reference batches, and is also part of the CPV setup of this workflow. And we can do this via multivariate statistic analysis, where the reference batches are selected, and all critical data is analyzed simultaneously. And this will help also defining the design space. So another important feature of having such a solution is this programming, let's not call it programming, definition of statistical alarms or triggers. So the platform should allow to select some statistical rules that best fit the product in question. So this, of course, will have to be configured and adapted to the customer needs. But overall, in the case of this client, for example, we have set up mainly some WestGuard rules. So, for example, if we have 10 consecutive measurements that are on the same side of the mean, that would trigger an alarm. By triggering this alarm, a notification would be sent via email to the person that was tagged as responsible for this product, for this process. And this would also be automatically highlighted on the corresponding chart or visualization type that we were selecting. But this configuration, this previous setup, is a really important step of this step-by-step guided workflow that we propose. And then yes, for each of the critical variables that were identified and included in the plan, so we have to set up and include the definition of these statistical parameters, including normality testing, control limits, CPK limits. So this is really, this will be a bit on the customer side. Of course, the goal is not to adapt the system or our approach completely to the current practices of the customer. Yes, but any solution must be flexible enough to adapt to the customer needs. And as I've mentioned before, so yeah, so the platform should aggregate all this data from different sources, accommodate both discrete and time series data trends, and then depending on the statistical models and all of these visualization types that the customer wants, it will allow the users to see data being generated and plotted in real time. And finally, this last requirement, so this automated CPV concept, is really just I would say, a consequence of all the previous requirements. So if our data is correctly mapped, systems are connected, the models are set up, and the types of alerts and visualizations are configured. So the flow of data, since its collection up to its reporting, can now become really automated, and this is what we call this automated CPV concept. Okay, so we have already looked at the CPV baseline, its concepts, benefits, and challenges, and a proposal for a guided step-by-step implementation, and based on a real case study. But now let's finally talk about this next step. So now that we have both world combined, the world of risk, the world of evidence, so risk data and CPV data, what are the potentialities of such a framework? And okay, yeah, before we look at our proposal, let's just launch a quick poll or discussion. And again, we just want to understand and think about this level of integration that you might have between these both approaches. Are they isolated closed systems, so where there is no risk data being fed into CPV and vice versa, there is no CPV data being fed back into risk assessment? Is there any degree of manual information being used, manual risk data being used in CPV and vice versa? Or are they completely integrated systems with data being automatically transferred between both platforms? Okay. Okay, so it's aligned with what would be our expectation. So not fully isolated. Yeah, it would be a bad sign if there was no information at all being used from our risk assessments to help generate our CPV plans, and the other way around, if no data from our CPV plan was being used to, for example, review our initial risk assessments. And that's what we are going to see on the next set of slides. So this is our experience, what we usually see. So this middle term. So yes, there is information, but this information in most cases is still being transferred manually, so copied and pasted between platforms. So this is also a good result. It's aligned with our expectations and what we want to overcome, and with our approach and our presentation to justify these needs to combine both worlds. So let's just move on. Okay, not this way, the other way. Okay, so let's start. So based on this last poll and these results, let's now see what our proposal is. And this is really where we start talking about the practical gains of combining both worlds, so the risk and evidence. So having two platforms, two systems, managing risk data and managing process data. So let's call it just CPV data. And let's look carefully at this diagram. So the goal is to try and portray the product life cycle from its initial to its later stages of development. And on the left side, we are at an initial stage, so the product development, R&D, where the amount of evidence or data is still low. So as you have been seeing, and there is not enough process knowledge. So when doing those initial, sorry, just moved on. So when doing those initial risk assessments, we are not basing those risk assessments yet on CPV data, on data from our process, because we are still at an initial stage. So at this point, the risk assessment is using just prior knowledge, literature, information from SMEs or from similar products, either from our organization or other organizations. And at the end, what will we have? We will have a control strategy that will not take into account the evidence and data being generated and coming out of the production process. So we can say that the uncertainty may be high at this point, the uncertainty associated with our control strategy. But then as we get into the manufacturing stages, we are or should be generating large amounts of data from the process itself and from the product. So all the sampling that we are doing, the monitoring, deviations, out of specifications, all this knowledge is being gathered with the goal of increasing the knowledge base and understanding of the process and the product. Of course, with this final goal of reducing the uncertainty, because we are now supporting our considerations with evidence and data from our production process. And this has to be looked or seen as this loop, as we are trying to portray here. So the more the process is used and is matured, more data is acquired, and our knowledge base gets increasingly more robust. So this should then be used to trigger the risk review, as we see here, and that concept defined in ICHQ9, so the risk review. So what is this? So refining the initial risk assessment with new data. And this will in turn turn our control strategy much more robust. But this is just a schematic view as an introduction for the following slides, where we will actually see a couple of examples of how to combine these worlds and what gains will we have. So as a summary, again, we have established an initial control strategy. We have defined our variables, assessed their criticalities, their impacts. We have established some actions and controls so that we know what to do in case something goes wrong. And then we moved into the production phase, commercial manufacturing stage, let's say, and we are now gathering metrics, evidence, data. So what can we do with this data? A couple examples here. First one, so we can use the evidence to validate, and validate here in the sense of, validate in the sense of confirming the previously identified risk. So review the initial risk assessment. What does this mean? Let's confirm if what we have established or assumed really makes sense. Does data confirm our assumptions or not? And let's act upon it. Let's review and refine if needed. Secondly, and this is really important, we can now determine the true occurrence of a failure mode. We are talking about failures, deviations from our process. So we have initially defined an occurrence value. We have estimated an occurrence value for our potential failure modes, but this was based on prior knowledge, prior experience, some literature. But we are now gathering data, and we are monitoring every issue, every deviation, every failure mode that does in fact happen. And this is is the occurrence. So it is not just how probably will this happen, it's the real frequency. And this will be a great insight for then us to review the initial occurrence values that were estimated. We can also obtain some correlation matrices between process parameters with actual values coming from the process. So again, with some statistical models, we'll be able to evaluate the actual impact of a process parameter in a quality attribute. And this will then also allow us to validate, corroborate or not, confirm or not the cause-effect metrics that we probably have done in our initial risk assessments that were also, again, based on just prior knowledge. So without going into much detail, we can easily give a really easy, but I would say strong use cases for the usage of data and for the implementation of this data coming out of the CPV, integrated with our risk management practices, and the implementation of this loop between platforms, between risk platforms and platforms managing our process information. And we are talking about generating CPV data and using it back into our initial risk assessment. But let's also think about how can QRM, so risk management, risk assessment practices, how can it help generate and maintain our CPV plan? So first use case, the generation of the CPV program itself. I'm sorry, I don't know why this is moving by itself. So this selection of variables that we want to measure during manufacturing should be the first action when implementing a CPV plan. And this selection will be done through criticality analysis, criticality assessment performed in our initial risk assessment. So evaluating all the process parameters, all the CQAs, the quality attributes, and let's at least select the ones that were defined as critical, so critical process parameters, critical quality attributes. So this is a step where risk management, let's say, is mandatory. So it's really important to have this support of QRM in the definition of the CPV plan. And so how can we do this evaluation? How can we support this definition using QRM tools? So let's use a cause-effect matrix to evaluate impact of a process parameter into a quality attribute. Let's take these critical correlations that we have identified and identify and evaluate and assess potential risks, so potential failures. Let's add mitigation actions to deal with these potential risks. So we have assessed the criticality, we have correlated them, we have built knowledge around our risks, our potential risks, and now let's confirm the criticality. Is it still critical after establishing an action plan? Let's add it to the CPV plan because we are considering it critical. Did we define it as non-critical, but we are able to think about potential and critical risks associated with this failure mode? Let's also consider it as a critical now and add it to the CPV plan. So have these checkpoints before creating the actual CPV plan, this checkpoint of assessing the criticality of our entire parameters of our process. So now the second use case, and this is the example that I was talking about. It's really important. So we have defined the variables that we need to monitor. We have established, hopefully, the alarms, and we will now define the metrics we want to monitor. So we will use a platform capable of not only collecting and aggregating data, but to also statistically interpret it. So we can define statistical models, as I say, simple metrics such as, in this example, the percentages of batches with detected alarms. So as long as we have defined and are capable of acquiring data for the variables, the possibilities are big. So in terms of how we want to see them, and sorry, once again, don't know what's happening here. And so these are really just some not theoretical, these are actual examples, but of some examples of visualizations. But what we want to bring you here is these two cases. So we will be able to get to this exact point where we can review occurrence values based on the actual metrics coming from our process. And in the first case, so what's happening here? We have we have initially defined or estimated an occurrence value for a potential failure mode with a value of 5. And let's say that this was the middle value. It was not estimated as a high occurrence value. And we did it because we are basing this decision on prior knowledge or even just the SME expertise. But then while gathering evidence during the manufacturing stage, the system has given the evidences of batches containing out of trends, out of specification values, some alarms for the actual occurrence of this failure mode. So what is the system proposing here? Is proposing a risk review of the occurrence in order to increase it based on the actual occurrence of this failure mode. And in the second case is the other way around. So we have classified the failure mode with a maximum occurrence value, but it turned out that during the manufacturing stages, there was no actual occurrence of this failure mode. So no out of trends, no out of specification, no deviation. We had no alarm that was triggered for this variable associated with this failure mode. And so the system will now suggest to review the risk assessment to lower the occurrence value and potentially even update the control strategy and lower the frequency of monitoring, of sampling of this variable, for example. Third use case for the integration of CPV with risk data. So what we call here the management of process deviation. So having a CPV plan will also be a good source to identify deviation. So this can come from the variables or even from equipments and operator, etc. So having identified the deviation, and what can this deviation be? Those out of trend, so something that occurred that should not have occurred. So it is important to evaluate if this behavior had already been considered when our initial risk assessments were performed. And was the deviation already tracked as a potential failure mode in the FMEA? And so in case the identified deviation is already considered in our most updated risk assessment and control strategy, so this new evidence can be used to review the occurrence values as we have just seen. On the contrary, this deviation was not yet included in our control strategy. So actually then the system is proposing to think about or to include, to define a new failure mode. So it's able not just to confirm, corroborate occurrences of existing failure modes, is actually able to also propose the addition of new failure modes to our overall risk assessment, to our FMEA, and then of course to our control strategy. Okay, so we are almost ending. Let's just look at a couple more slides. I'll be really quick here. So we have been talking about this combination or this loop between CPV and risk. But now let's also include this continuous improvement, and this is aligned with that loop that we have seen, in the sense that at every iteration between CPV and QRM, every iteration is done with the goal to improve one or the other. So this is the continuous improvement goal. So continuous improvement, and how? By reviewing, redefining, refining risk. So increasing the knowledge space, the knowledge base, so that you are able to reduce uncertainty and of course reduce subjectivity, which is always associated with any human decision, not just the initial risk assumptions. But the goal is, yes, let's reduce it because we now have data and we have evidence that can be a good support to reduce this subjectivity. Finally, okay, so other than some practical advantages of combining both worlds, we can also explore other advantages. For example, so, and this is aligned with the continuous improvement concept, the opportunity to learn with changes. So I'm increasing my knowledge, I will be able to identify new opportunities much more easily. And so in other words, I'm actually also answering to the ICHQ10 knowledge management concepts. I'm making my knowledge management process much more robust. I will be able to quickly search and look for data, information, insights, And yes, I'm of course assuming that this risk and this data loop is done in a digital way. There is no other option. But by having this powerful knowledge base is really a powerful tool. And not only will I be able to look for data, but I would say that the goal and the path forward is to use systems that are able to process data, and the systems themselves be proactive in suggesting actions, predicting behaviors. We could talk about, for example, preventive or predictive maintenance of an equipment based, for example, on its performance. In general terms, be able to avoid these undesirable events, increasing the overall performance of the process of our system. How? Reducing deviations, reducing out of specifications. And the list could go, yes, it could go on. The possibilities are really big, but the question here is really, let's think about what we should measure. Let's take care of our data. Yes, let's have a system in place. Let's think about metrics that really make sense and add value. And from that point forward, yes, the opportunities are great. And just some final remarks. Okay, so we have gone through this, and let's not list again every advantage of having a digital CPV. Let's only, again, acknowledge that the challenges and consequently the benefits of overcoming these challenges are related with our data. So how we manage it and guarantee its quality and integrity, also related with the availability of resources, and also really important, this mentality or approach that the organization has regarding the data and what to do with the data, being proactive instead of reactive. And okay, yes, final slide, final message. What should we really bring into our organizations, our teams, our process? Is this message that we like to state, saying that we should all search for this integrated approach based on risk and data, yes, with a proper approach supporting by digital systems. And these digital systems should be able to provide this complete view of a product over the entire life cycle. And this, yes, will of course enable the organization to generate, to store, to analyze, and to manage information over time in a structured way. And so, yes, final message: let's keep the risk up with data and the data generated according to the risk. So once again, this final concept of having this retrofitting loop between risk, between data, it will help streamline the implementation and the maintenance of our CPV program, but it will also be a great source, a great trigger to then go back to those initial risk assumptions that we all do based on existing knowledge, and review them and increasing its robustness, reducing subjectivity, reducing uncertainty, and increasing the overall confidence in our products, in our processes, and yes, in the overall interactions that we have with the regulatory agencies, with other partners, with all the stakeholders. So this is really the final message that we want to portray here. And yes, I would really like to thank to my colleagues. So Katerina, Sandra, and Sofia, all of them are part of our data science team. So they are really the brains behind this approach, behind these technical details. And I'm sure that if you have any question, any curiosity regarding all these statistical models, I will for sure not be the most competent person to talk about this, but our data science team will answer with really a lot of availability and pleasure. So we are available for questions either here in the chat, or if you want to send message later via email. I don't know if my email was shared or not, but we are totally available to help you somehow. And thanks again, everyone.
Thank you, Pedro. Yes, we are happy to forward on any questions for you and the team. But in the meantime, maybe if anyone has any questions or would like to either post it in the chat function, or please do unmute yourself and ask the question. Does anyone have a question? This is your opportunity.
And if not, was my email shared or will it be Actually, I don't think I have it in the presentation, but
No, it's not.
okay.
It's not in the presentation. Do you want
Yeah,
to
right.
give me your email and then
Sure, I can write it in the chat. Yeah,
yes, if you put it in the chat. Does anyone
that's
have a
it.
question for Pedro?
Okay, I've just shared the email.
Got it?
Be completely free to send us any question you might want.
Thank you. And also, this presentation is actually recorded and it will be posted on the ISPE Singapore YouTube page so that if anyone missed the beginning and wants to read, they can. You can also refer your colleagues to it as well, obviously. But thank you for covering the
Yep.
case studies, Pedro. And thank you, everybody, for joining. If there are no questions, then we will end the session a few minutes early. I'd like to thank you for your time and for sharing your experience with us. And thank you for, this morning for you and for afternoon for everyone else.
And thank you so much again for this opportunity. Yes, I really hope it was productive and we will be waiting for questions. No problem. Yeah.
Fabulous. All right. Well, thank you very much for everyone. And I think we're going to stop the recording.
Mhm.
And yeah, so thank you, Pedro. We hope to see you again at another time. And yeah, really appreciate your time this morning.